Well, we've been talking a lot about vibes with the Phillies here, really ever since the playoffs last season, and up and down the vibes have gone so far here in 2023. But over the last month or so, it really does feel like the Phillies are riding a crest of good vibes. And joining me to talk about vibes in sports is an expert on this topic, Jason Delgandio. He has a website called the 20-Minute Vibe, which actually helps athletes understand vibes and sports energy. He's a professor at Temple University. So again, you can consider him a sports vibes expert. Jason, thanks for coming on Hittin Season. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
It's good to talk to you. And obviously, you've been talking about vibes in sports for a long time now. So I imagine this Phillies team comes along and it just kind of, it sinks its teeth into right what you're kind of talking about. And, I think that goes along with the Philadelphia Eagles, too. Two teams that are playing really well. They've got good rosters. People feel good about them. And the positivity in the city towards both of those teams seems to really be cresting at the moment. And so I think we also look back to a couple weeks ago when a struggling Trey Turner received that standing ovation from the Citizens Bank Park crowd over and over and over again. And he's played so much better since then. How much of an impact do you think fans have on players and how our vibes can translate from fan to player?
Well, sure. I think the vibe in general is a big part of sports. If you think about the sports experience, it's hard to imagine either being a player or a coach or just a fan without some feeling, without some emotion, without some vibe. I can't imagine going to a stadium and paying $100 for a ticket, $10 for a beer, $25 for parking, and not to have any vibe there, no actual embodied experience. So it's a big part of the overall sports experience. In terms of the fans' influence on athletes, I do think it's a real phenomenon. Now, to what degree is debatable, right? But as an athlete, though, you can feel the positive support or the negativity of fans. And that will translate into your own psychology, your own emotional state, your ability to focus on the game, etc. So we saw with Trey Turner, though, that collectively speaking, the Philly fans decided, we're going to support this guy, give him a standing ovation, and obviously translate it into production on the field. That's not always the case, but here, though, we see a real-life example of how the collective vibe of the fans does translate into on-field results.
I guess before we talk about this anymore, I want to get your definition of what a vibe is.
So my very broad definition of the vibe is the exchange of energy between you and the world. So again, the exchange of energy between you and the world. But from a philosophical standpoint, the question is, what is this energy? In other words, is it a physical phenomenon or is it metaphysical? Is it spiritual or scientific? Is it material or immaterial? Is it all these things or something else altogether? Right. So I purposely try to keep my definition broad, though, because I think there are different ways to interpret this phenomenon referred to as the vibe. But regardless of how you define it, though, you can see it operating within the sports phenomenon.
And so what you talk about is getting a player to get in tune with the vibes that their other teammates have or the fans have. How does an athlete use vibes, use these good feelings, use positive? I guess it's really using positive energy, right, to improve how they play the game.
Sure. Well, I think first, just being aware of and mindful of this vibe phenomenon. In other words, the energy, the fans bring a certain energy to the stadium. Your fellow teammates have a collective vibe in the dugout, in the locker room. The opposing team has their own vibe, right? You might have a star player on your team that is hogging all of the vibe or giving out the wrong vibe. So it's almost like being a vibe checker, right? How do I check my vibe? And how do I tune into the vibe of my fellow players, the opposition, the fans? And then from there, though, how do I use that, right? It's almost like being a meteorologist. So how do you read the weather patterns? How do you read the collective vibe that you're experiencing?
So, and you also talk, you can get a competitive advantage by using the sports vibe, by tapping into that.
Yeah. Now, I don't want to overstate the case. Just because you can read a vibe or feel a vibe is not going to make you win the World Series. There's much more involved than being a championship team or even just winning a basic game here, right? Mm-hmm. But it's the idea, if you're an athlete, though, aren't you looking for every advantage possible, right? And so if I can if I'm a batter, and I can feel out the vibe of the pitcher, or if I can vibe that person out, in other words, my vibe is stronger, more aggressive, more positive than the pitcher, that might give me a competitive advantage. One of the ways to think about this is the pressure moments in sports. And are you a clutch performer or do you choke? Right. Now think about the intensity of that moment. We as fans can feel it, and everyone on the field can feel that. right? The great athletes live up to the intensity and they match that intensity and they use the intensity of that collective emotion, that collective vibe to their advantage. Meanwhile, though, other players, even some great players, choke under that pressure. The physical phenomenon of this collective emotion is too intense and they choke, right? It affects their emotions and affects their psychology.
And I would even say, too, based on our experience with the Phillies last year, a team that hadn't made the playoffs in 10 straight years, they were playing really well in the latter part of the season, but then they kind of went into another tailspin towards the very end of the season, and the vibes started to become very bad. And it seemed like fans were just waiting for this team to choke again. The players themselves were underperforming. They were losing to losing teams. But then they righted the ship just in time. You know, the last week and a half of the season, they got back on track. They won the wild card. And then all of a sudden, it was as if the good times couldn't stop in October until the very end of the playoffs, the very end of the World Series, where, you know, sometimes play on the field actually has more to do with anything than vibes do. But ever since then, it felt like there was, I can't even really pinpoint it, but it seemed like there was like a line of demarcation where this team was awash in bad vibes, and then all of a sudden it switched. Once they made the playoffs and got the monkey off their back, it just looked like things changed from an emotional standpoint for that team.
Sure, 100%. So first thing about that, so in our society, we have the saying like only good vibes, but that's not the reality. There are good vibes, there are bad vibes, sad vibes, happy vibes, all kinds of vibes, right? And so for a sports team, though, the collective vibe of the team will ebb and flow throughout the season, especially something like baseball because it's so long, right? The hope is, though, you get into the right groove, the right collective mindset, the right emotional state, the right vibe at the right time. And that's what happened with the Phillies last year, right? And that, though, has a symbiotic relationship between the team itself, and especially in Philadelphia, the overall fan base, right? Mm-hmm. The collective vibe of Philadelphia as a city ebbs and flows with the collective vibe of the sports teams, which is why it's such a great sports town, right? But yeah, so it definitely plays an important role, though, in terms of getting on track at the right time, right? And that's really important.
So last thing for you here, how I don't know, how long have you lived in the city all your life? Have you been a sports fan in Philadelphia for a long, or how long have you been here?
Well, I'm actually originally from North Jersey, and so I grew up rooting for New York teams, which I know I shouldn't say, but that's the reality, right? But I've been down in this area since 2006.
And is this the best the vibes have felt since 2000, since you got here? Like I've been a sports fan, a Philadelphia sports fan since the late 80s, and I'm having a hard time remembering a time when the fan base was as positive about this many of their sports teams, especially the Phillies and Eagles, as they are right now.
I would agree. I mean, back in 2008 when they won the World Series, obviously that was a major positive vibe then. But in terms of the number of months, the longevity, and the intensity, yeah, I mean, the Eagles, the Phillies, going back to last year into this year, the fans are riding that vibe. There's no doubt about it. It's fun. It's fun to be a part of.
And that's the thing. Sports is supposed to be fun. The vibes are part of it. And I think the thing that's been fun for fans here over these last couple of weeks is seeing the impact that fans are having on the play on the field. Like it is possible for a fan base, for people sitting in the seats to actually affect the team on the field. And Philadelphia fans have been criticized for decades for being a negative influence on players with booing and all that kind of stuff. And I will never tell a fan they can't boo, but this is a case where, and like you said, it's not always going to work out that way, but the fan base's positive energy seems to have really fixed their superstar player who was just struggling so much. Jason, if people want to read your stuff or learn more about this, where can they go to do that?
They can go to my website, which is 20minutevibe.com. Again, 20minutevibe.com.
And Jason's got a bunch of videos there that you can watch on this subject. Hey, Jason, thanks for coming on Hittin' Season. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun. Appreciate it.
All right, well, now it's time for our stat of the week. The Yankees narrowly avoided a 10-game losing streak. They pounded the Nationals on Wednesday night to snap their 9-game losing streak. Only 2 active players today were alive the last time the Yankees had a 9-game losing streak. Rich Hill and Adam Wainwright. The last time the Yankees had lost 9 games in a row was in 1982. The last time the Yankees had a 10-game losing streak, and again they avoided that here with this win over the Nationals. You'd have to be 110 years old today to have seen it. It was on May 21st through June 6th of 1913. And that's going to do it for this edition of Hittin' Season. Want to remind you to make sure that you are on the Hittin' Season landing page over at Billy Penn, billypenn.com/Hittin' Season. We've had a lot of people asking about the podcast. Why haven't we heard it on Apple Podcasts? Some people don't use anything other than Apple Podcasts, and we're wondering if the show had disappeared. We are obviously here because you're hearing me right now. If you know someone that is struggling to find us right now, you can just point them in the direction of billypenn.com/Hittin' Season, or you can just get us on one of the other streaming platforms. But we do hope to be back on Apple Podcasts within the next day or two. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time right here on Hittin' Season.